we wanted to have a discussion about the negotiations for a possible ceasefire that are happening right now. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, Blinken is bouncing around Europe and the Middle East. What do we know about what's happening?
Well, can I just say we wanted to have John present that before talking about the ceasefire talks, because I think it's important to root our understanding of these talks in the military reality on the ground. And what we've just seen is that the resistance is continuing to fight, is continuing to land painful blows on the enemy, is continuing to cause major losses to the enemy. And that context is very important, because what happened yesterday in Doha, in Qatar, is that Antony Blinken was there. And as we mentioned earlier, the Qatari foreign minister, of course, Qatar, along with Egypt, has been one of the key mediators between the resistance and Israel and the United States. Israel and the United States being on one side as enemies of the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian resistance being on the other side. And so Qatar said, the foreign minister said that Hamas responded positively to a framework for a ceasefire that was hammered out in Paris by the United States and Qatar and Egypt. And it was interesting that Hamas took its time to respond. They took something like a week. You know, there was sort of anticipation every day. When is Hamas going to respond? Well, they finally responded. The Qatari foreign minister said, you know, they responded positively. They have some reservations that they've sent us, and we're not going to say more because of the sensitivity of the negotiations. But then yesterday, there were a number of interviews and statements and press conferences by various representatives of the resistance factions. I watched an interview with Mohammed al-Hindi, the deputy chief of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and also with Ghazi Hamad, who is one of the leaders of Hamas. And they were very consistent. They said, we won't go into too much detail, but basically our proposals or our response. And by the way, this was a response that came as a unified front from all the resistance factions. So the response Hamas gave was on behalf of all the resistance factions. They said, we stick to our basic principles. And it became clearer what those principles are this morning when details of the Palestinian counteroffer have been revealed in the media. And basically, the Palestinian proposal, just to give a brief outline of it, is for a truce or ceasefire of 3 phases, which with each phase lasting up to 45 days. So a total of 135 days. But they're very clear that at the end of this, they expect a permanent ceasefire. That's part of this phasing, is that there would be negotiations to turn this into a permanent ceasefire. But in the first phase, there would be an exchange of captives, where the elderly captives and the ones who are under 19 years old, I didn't know that there were any left, but apparently there may be, will be released, and the Israelis will release a number of prisoners. There will be a massive flow of aid into Gaza, and the Israelis will relocate out of populated areas in Gaza. In the second phase, we would get to the exchange of Israeli prisoners of war, military prisoners, and more prominent Palestinian prisoners, those with very long sentences or political leaders. There would be the beginnings of reconstruction, a complete withdrawal from Gaza, by the Israeli forces. And in the third phase, we would get to things like reconstruction, completely ending the siege on Gaza, and a permanent ceasefire. I may have got some of the elements that belong in one phase, put them into another, but that's just to give you a basic idea of how they think about it. I read the whole proposal, at least the text of what is said to be the proposal, and it looks to me very reasonable, very moderate, very pragmatic, and yet I can't imagine Israel signing on to it. The Israeli leaders are at the same time insisting, Netanyahu and the defense minister Yoav Gallant, that they intend to pursue the war to the very end. Their goals are the complete destruction of Hamas. Netanyahu has talked about imposing a military government on Gaza, that it will be like the West Bank, where the Israelis can go into any community at any time. And they're still talking about that way. And they're also threatening a full-scale invasion of Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza that borders Egypt, and which normally has a population of some 300,000, but now it's closer to 1.5 million because so many people are sheltering there, trying to escape the genocide further north. So it seems to me that the gap between the very moderate and reasonable Palestinian proposals and the extremist position of the Israeli government, at least if we can call it that, because there's so much division and disarray in the Israeli leadership that they don't seem to even have a unified position, and they haven't yet given a formal response to the proposals, although that may come any time with Blinken there
Right.
today. But I just want to say that the very fact that Israel and the United States are negotiating with Hamas, and Blinken is essentially the mediator, the shuttle between the Hamas leadership and Israel right now, is already a defeat for Israel, because Israel had led us all to believe that within a couple of weeks of the start of the war, they would have already completely destroyed Hamas, eradicated them from the face of the earth. The Biden administration fully supported that role, as did all the European countries and the EU and so on. There was this sort of almost gleeful expectation that Hamas would be eradicated. And here they are, with Hamas taking both the military initiative on the ground, as we've seen, and the political initiative in terms of laying out this detailed proposal. So it's difficult to see. We've had some of our friends and colleagues in Gaza telling us that there's a lot of hope and optimism in Gaza, hope for a ceasefire, but it's very hard to see those gaps being closed, at least if we take at face value what the Israeli leaders are saying. Whether the reality on the ground will dictate a different outcome remains to be seen. But that's where we are for now. I'm curious to hear what Nora, John, and Asa think about this.
Yeah, I mean, if a ceasefire proposal is accepted, where are the guarantees that Israel won't, completely violate it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that the resistance leaders have made clear repeatedly and said in various interviews over the last 24 hours, is that there have to be international guarantees that we
yeah,
don't trust Israel, and there's no reason to trust Israel, of course, and that during the week-long truce in November, that Israel violated that, as we saw when they killed civilians or fired at civilians trying to return to their homes, that there have to be international guarantees. So, of course, that would include guarantees from the United States, perhaps from the Europeans, from Turkey, from Egypt, and so on. And that Israel would have to be held to account for abiding by any agreement that is eventually signed.
Yeah.
Well, they wrote the Hamas agreement is written in stages in order that it's honored. So the first stage is essentially releasing the rest of the civilians that could have been released on the first day, but also could have been released in the first exchange. And then there's
but that Israel refused,
right,
just to be clear.
Right.
But there's amendments to the first stage that have to be met before the second stage kicks in, and the second stage is the release of the soldiers. So Hamas has built this proposal so that the release of the soldiers doesn't happen before the guarantees that they're asking for, which are essentially the resumption and rehabilitation and reconstruction of Gaza immediately, starting with the hospitals, allowing people to immediately go back home.
And to be provided with temporary housing while the reconstruction goes on. So again, built into the proposal is getting people back to the sites of their original homes immediately, even if they have to live in tents until the reconstruction happens. But again, they built into the proposal to make sure that a prolonged phased process can't result in the permanent displacement of the people in Gaza.
And that's what Israel is trying to do right now. I mean, they're mining, they're putting mines in all these buildings, like we saw at the beginning of John's segment. They're trying to make the Gaza Strip completely uninhabitable before any sort of negotiations take place. I mean, it is relentless and it is sadistic. This is, and it's either bomb everything so that it's completely uninhabitable, or push Palestinians out into Egypt, and both. I mean, that's also their plan. I mean, it's.
But that's clearly not going to happen, which is what we're seeing right now. Is that the Mossad and Shabak chiefs were meeting in Paris to essentially approve a broad agreement on a ceasefire, which is what the Israelis need as well. And so the way that the Palestinians have structured this proposal, it's premised upon the reconstruction, allowing that part to begin. They want machinery from civil defense so that people can dig out from the rubble, and they want guarantees that the prisoners will not be rearrested. And so they have built all these, itemized all of these things, like restoring the telecommunications, the water, the food aid delivery throughout Gaza, which currently is 1/16 of the needs, to have more than 500 trucks a day. And so they've built that on the civilian, the first stage of the civilian release. And so if these things don't happen, if Israel does violate this agreement, their soldiers will remain in captivity. They will remain captives of the Palestinian resistance, which is the way that they've structured this. To do that is to essentially hold these soldiers. And Israel is on the position where they didn't dismantle the resistance. They didn't dismantle the Hamas government. They didn't return their captives. And so they really have nothing but genocide and destruction to stand on for this 5-month war.
And that policy, remember, of course, Israel may have multiple goals with destruction and genocide. Certainly a clear one that has been expressed by many Israeli officials is ethnic cleansing, the removal of the Palestinian population. And we saw just in the last week or so, what was it, 12 ministers some large number of government ministers attending this Nuremberg rally type conference calling for the resettlement of Gaza by Jewish settlers. So that's certainly a goal. But the other goal of all the destruction, as we know, the so-called Dahya doctrine, which Israel first implemented in Lebanon in 2006, is that you attack the civilian population, you destroy the infrastructure, you kill the families of the resistance fighters in order to break the resistance and in order to break the bond between the people and the resistance. And that has clearly failed.
Right.
And so but I do wonder what it looks like for Israeli leaders to climb down from where they are, from these, absolutist and extremist positions, to accept something like this. That seems like reality dictates, military reality dictates that they have to, but it's very hard to see them doing it, given the corner they've painted themselves into.
Yeah,
it's an
I think
admission of defeat.
Yeah,
I think that's the $64,000 question right now: is how do they climb down from the position they've painted themselves into? And a small update that while we've been on air, on stream, as it were, some of the news agencies are reporting that Netanyahu has rejected the Hamas counter offer.
yes.
And it does seem that in a press conference after meeting Blinken, he said that the war will continue until victory. But tomorrow is pointing out that the Israeli war cabinet is meeting tomorrow. So I guess we'll see what happens.
And also Osama Hamdan, a very senior Hamas official, said in his press conference today, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet, I'm just reading a summary, that Netanyahu's remarks on the ceasefire proposal show that he intends to pursue the conflict in the region. But again, I think that if you look at the Hamas proposal in detail, this is a proposal that is intended to bring life back to Gaza, calm and security to the people of Gaza. But a wise Israeli leadership, if one existed, would also see it as something to grab onto, because it would also provide Israel with what it claims it wants, which is calm and peace and security and so on. But it just seems that Israeli leaders are absolutely incapable of that. So I guess the question now is, if that's the position of Netanyahu, is it going to be the position of the United States? Up to this point, the United States has been in lockstep with Israel, despite the fake disagreements that they've had for public consumption, where the U.S. claims that it's putting pressure on Israel while airlifting the bombs around the clock so that Israel can continue the genocide. But then we start getting into discussions about the political calendar in the United States, and how with Biden's approval ratings are at historic lows for his administration, but also at historic lows for a president seeking re-election. I don't have all those numbers at the top of my head, but I read about this recently, that other presidents who were defeated after their first term all had higher approval ratings than Biden. So the politics of this in the United States, where, as we mentioned earlier, we see Muslim and Arab Americans organizing and saying, don't try and scare us with Donald Trump, because there's nothing worse than genocide. And if the Democrats and Joe Biden don't pay a price for genocide, then we will never have any leverage, and we have to be courageous and accept the consequences of making Joe Biden pay a price for this position. So if people hold to that, and the polls continue to show this ongoing deterioration in Joe Biden's prospects. The question is, will that translate into real pressure on Israel from the United States, not out of any sympathy for the Palestinian people or respect for international law, but simply out of the political needs and exigencies of the Democratic Party and the Biden administration. By the way, speaking of Biden, Tamara, do we have a minute to put up Joe Biden's response to Hamas's announcement that it had received the proposal?
There is some movement, and I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response
Oh, it's so painful.
from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now. There is some movement, and I don't want to.
That's it.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's elder abuse at this point. Putting
yeah. But aside from that, look what he said there. I mean, it is painful to watch because you don't know what he's going to say, and clearly he couldn't remember the name of Hamas. But when he says it's a little over the top, what does that mean, a little over the top? What actually is Hamas and the resistance factions asking for? They're asking for an end to genocide. They're asking for people to be allowed to go back to their homes. They're asking for sufficient supplies of food, water, and medicine for people. They're asking for tents for people to live in while their houses are reconstructed. They're asking for all of this destruction to be rebuilt so that people can live normal lives. And they're asking for negotiations that would lead to a lifting of the siege on Gaza, the tight siege that has been going on for 14, 15 years, and a permanent ceasefire that would produce a durable and sustainable calm for everyone. That's actually what the Hamas and the resistance proposal is. But Joe Biden is saying that's a little over the top. Reconstructing hospitals and supplying them with equipment so they can treat people in Gaza, that's over the top. And I think that was a reflection of how the United States government really thinks, that Palestinians are just not entitled to a normal life, the basic necessities of life. And of course, it is a major violation of international law that to use humanitarian supplies, water, food, medicine, fuel, as leverage in negotiations, as something you withhold from a civilian population in order to force them or their leadership to act in a certain way. But that's just become a norm in this situation where Palestinians have to negotiate for food, they have to negotiate for antibiotics, they have to negotiate for bandages, and that's the point we've reached. And Joe Biden is saying it's over the top. They didn't ask for the moon even here. I mean, they haven't even raised in this proposal the bigger political questions about the future of Palestine. If this Hamas proposal were implemented in full, it would, and respected by everyone, it would lead to a reasonable, peaceful life for Palestinians in Gaza and for Israelis, but it wouldn't address the much bigger questions about the situation in Palestine. And yet, Joe Biden is saying it's over the top.
Right. Despicable. I guess we're going to see what happens.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.